Members of the Labor Committee, if you would mind, please stand. Vice Chairman Seaworth, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much for all of you for coming. I appreciate it. It's on a Friday. And we're going to, as Representative Sullivan knows, I like to have free-flowing discussions whenever possible, especially in a situation where we're talking about retained bills. So we'll obviously be less formal, speak as you feel free. We can have not so much a debate between each other, but it's good to have a free-flowing discussion. And if there is a discussion, I will gladly have a back and forth with Representative Cahill on anything he'd like to do and whatever, and that's going to be positive for everybody. So, Representative Sullivan.
Just to be clear, when we spoke about these retained bills with the Democratic caucus, I encouraged everyone to come if they wanted to, but the members of this work group, the chairman indicated that he wanted to have three Republicans and three Democrats on this. So the three who are really members of the work group are Representative Leclerc, Representative Bouchard, and Representative Cahill, and they'll be doing the three bills in the morning. So they will be the group for all three bills. And in the afternoon, for the OSHA bill, it'll be myself, Representative Susi, and Representative McKenzie. So just so, I mean, there may be people coming and going. I think it's helpful to know what people's role are. Those are the roles, and perhaps, Mr. Chairman, you can tell us how the Republicans are divided up on this.
I would if I knew. We had a lot of people unable to come at the last couple days, so
you indicated that you wanted to have 3 and 3.
I did, and I did not want to pinpoint. I apologize. I'm not trying to be coy or anything. Some of the folks that are here today will be here for some, and others will come in as others. And I'm, quite frankly, with some of the emails back and forth, I'm not sure who's going to be present today.
When it comes time to try to figure out how we move forward, it would help. I mean, we've designated 3 people for each bill. It'd be good if at some point you could designate three Republicans who would be teaming up with our fine Democratic members to figure things out. So figure it out, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Cahill.
Yes, I just have a suggestion, perhaps the tried and true eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Okay. I will, as we, after this first one, I know kind of who's going to do what. Representative Love and Colcom are doing a few things, and so Representative Granger and wanted to support another one, and so I will make sure that I have your list. Quite frankly, I was kind of waiting to see who was going to show up, because, like, I'll be honest with you, Lino Avalani called me and said, "Well, I can't make it. I have a guy out. I'm going to make it late." And Lino's the one who's going to be an eye on the OSHA. So again, not trying to be coy, but I do respect that your request and wanting to know. So the first bill we have on the docket here for 10 o'clock is House Bill 190, relative to the duration of unemployment benefits. And this bill came to us, and it wanted to have the duration of benefits based upon the unemployment rate at the time. So if the unemployment rate were lower than a certain amount, then there would be fewer weeks allotted to the individual for unemployment. Higher the unemployment rate, higher the number of weeks available to the employee. I think we all agree that there were problems with the way it was written. The department had some issues at how they would manage this, being that, as you know, we have rates that are calculated based on two sets of surveys every month, one to businesses and one to employees themselves. And that sometimes those are not exact or perfect and have to be revised the following month based on additional information. And it would be very difficult on a monthly basis with people maybe on unemployment for 1 month and then get a job and then be off for a couple and then maybe add another, that it wasn't tenable. So in speaking with the representative Turcott, he was floating the idea of decreasing the amount, number of weeks of benefits from 26 to 22, but increasing the benefit. New Hampshire has a relatively low benefit that is provided, and that was what some kind of a compromise of trying to increase the amount paid while reducing the weeks by 4. His belief is that the charts that are provided, a vast majority of people on unemployment are find employment within the first 2 or 3 months, but there's a certain percentage that wait till that last 3 or 4 weeks. It's like 8 or 10% wait till the end. We had discussions as to why that occurs, but that is where the intent of the representative is at this point. So I'll just open it to any kind of discussion.
First of all, I apologize that I'm late.
No worries.
You mentioned so that, did you mean people who are going through the unemployment process wait till the end to get a job? Is that what you were, I just want to make sure I understand you.
If you look at the charts of how long people stay on, how many weeks on average, not on average, how many weeks people have unemployment, obviously the first 3 or 4 weeks is high, and then it goes down, and the curve continues to go down, and then it kind of spikes the last 2 weeks.
Interesting. Well, I can say, in terms of the notion of a waiting time, all of the requirements, because I have been unemployed twice in the last 10 years, and I don't think this part has changed. You cannot wait to look for work. You have to every week to receive any of the unemployment assistance. You have to not only agree in your agreements that you do weekly. There is a notice that you check that says, I am continuing to look for work. And then you are supposed to report at least 2 of those. And the assumption is you're doing way more than 2 of those. I can't explain what a blip at the end would mean, other than, as you know, I'm in a field that doesn't have a ton of workers. So that could be one of those. I mean, some people just are in jobs that don't have a lot of openings for one reason or another at certain points in our economy. But again, I can't explain the blip, but legally you cannot receive, and you agree that you cannot receive if you aren't actively looking for work every week. And if you stop looking for work for a week, I don't know if you can get back on it, but I do know that you're not allowed to receive it for that week. Like, I don't know, maybe you went to somebody's wedding out of the state or something. I don't know if you can even go back on unemployment after that. But if you are not actively looking for work every week and report at least 2 employers that you've communicated with or applied for a job, just know that there really isn't a waiting period. I hope that's helpful.
No, I understand. There is a 1 week waiting period, as we all know, but you are correct. There are a number of mechanisms that are required, from vocational training to showing up to going to get your resume worked on to requiring and correct. You have to look for work. You can't be gone on vacation for a week or 2, and no doubt you are correct on all those venues. One of the other reasons, I see your hands, gentlemen. One of the other reasons that I think we determined that some people wait is that there's a thing called partially unemployed, if you will. Kind of started the last time we had a little recession. For some of you folks that are new to the committee, it it used to be you can now get unemployment benefits if you were used to working 40 hours a week, and your employer says, "Look, we don't have a lot of work this week. I'm going to bring you down to 20 hours for the next 3 weeks. I can only give you 20 hours." So there is an ability to get some of the partial. So if you have someone that is going to, doesn't look like it now with a 1.9% unemployment rate, but some of us who've been here long enough on this committee remember when we had, a higher unemployment rate and it wasn't as easy to find work. And you would, employers might say, gee, for the next 5 or 6 months, especially during the winter season or whatever, if we're slow, we're not going to be able to give you the full time. And so people will do that, and that could be one of the reasons you have that spike in the end, that last couple of weeks, that certain people stay on for a longer period of time. So there's other reasons that are not nefarious, as, I'm just going to hang out. And we've all heard stories, of people that, well, take the summer off. But, I think those are few and far between. Representative Bouchard, then Cahill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Fortunately, I've never had to go through that experience. However, according to the data that was given to us, the majority of the people who fall in that category of going through the limit are people with disabilities, people who have child care responsibilities, such as women, and also older workers, and that have a really difficult time trying to find a job.
I think you should also include in there, if I could expand on what you're saying, Representative Bouchard, individuals who may have been in an occupation for the last 25 or 30 years, and there's been changes in that. So I will use a machine shop as an example. You're used to using your hands with a machine shop, and now there really aren't that many machine shops where you use your hands anymore, and you have to learn a computer skill because they're CAD-based computer screens, and the machines do the work. And you need more vocational training because you really can't find one of those jobs that you used to have because they're not doing it that way anymore. Representative Cahill.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think you and my colleague to my right here have covered most of what I was going to say about this, because the statistics don't get into the details about the circumstances. It could be that you live in Coos County and there just aren't as many jobs as there would be in Hillsborough County, or that, like you said, the skill set that you have, or your age, you're a gray beard and not as desirable to I'm with you, brother, to the employer. And so there's a lot of factors, but what I don't think is a problem is that our benefits are too generous, or so generous to the point where people are kicking back and just saying, I got everything I need on this amount of money that the state pays me, and I'm not going to bother looking. I don't think the bill is really focused on an area that we need attention to.
In speaking with the assistant commissioner, I asked if a couple times a year he or other members of his staff go on these, I don't know what you call them. They all meet, people, chairman and vice chairman will meet from somewhere across the country with other, yes, thank you. I was going to say convention, but conference. And they get together and they go to these conferences. I said, is there anything you've learned that other states have done that you could bring back that has to do with those people that are hanging on that last couple of weeks? And he actually, quite frankly, felt that New Hampshire was kind of ahead of the curve on a lot compared to a lot of their counterparts in other states. We are a little more aggressive than others in helping people get back. And there really wasn't anything in any of these conferences that they had gone to where they had seen anything that any other state had come up with that was that great and wonderful that we should adopt. Representative Sullivan, oh, go ahead. Sullivan, yeah, okay, Brian. Representative
Other Brian.
Seaworth, the other Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my concern here is I'm not sure what we're trying to solve. So, for example, I think everyone here would agree that our goal is not to spend as little money as possible. Is our goal to get people back to work the fastest? That's one of the metrics that we tout, but as you just explained, that isn't necessarily the best thing. If someone needs to be retrained in a computer skill that they never had, it might take more time to do that. So, and I think that is the right starting point, talking to the department and saying, what are we doing right? What have you seen done elsewhere that might be better? This approach feels like kind of a shot in the dark, that, well, maybe things would be better if we cut the weeks by this much. And it's not, I don't see what we're trying to accomplish and therefore how this is getting us there. It more seems like just a thing to try that could help. For myself, I would need to start with that goal and that approach that's going to achieve that goal rather than simply let's try something that might help.
No, I agree. That's why I had asked the assistant commissioner about these conferences. Is there anything else we're not doing to tag? You're right. If you're going to solve the problem, solve the problem. Don't create something that's not solving anything. That's just try to find out that last 10%. Representative Clerk.
Yeah, thank
Leclerc.
you. So you mentioned the possibility of increasing the benefit. Who does that? Is the DES totally in charge of what it is, or and then it comes before the House?
Legislature.
Okay. And if so, I mean, what would be the thought process? I mean, a percentage, kind of cost of living type thing, or I mean, do we have any idea how long it's been at where it is now?
20 years, Brian? I think it's probably, I've been here almost 20 years.
And it's been the same
Taking time
amount?
off, but, up here. And I think it's been done in 20 years.
And
Do
if that's-
you remember when the last time it was done? It's all right. But it's been a long time. It's been a long time and
So that might be something just initially to get the ball rolling, to find out how long it's been, maybe do a couple of colas or however it's typically gone up and kind of figure it out from there. I mean, personally, I don't mind the 26 weeks. It's been that way for a long time as well. So
understand that's only the
like
state,
Representative said.
the federal government also in certain times adds other benefits on when they see fit.
Yeah.
Representative Sullivan.
Thank you. I guess the horse trade of increasing benefits in exchange for decreasing weeks, it's a little too vague for me. And I guess the other thing, I just opened the booklet that the deputy commissioner brought to us to describe where we're at, and it's too small to see everything, but the green on this map, 26 weeks. All of New England, except for Rhode Island, has got 26 weeks. They probably also receive a higher level of benefits than New Hampshire because we're definitely on the low side. So for us to give up weeks in exchange for gaining ground on the other New England states with regard to benefits doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So I just doesn't make sense to me. Rhode Island, by the way, has got 30 weeks. So
Mass.
and I guess if Representative Turcott has a new plan, I would expect that he would have been here to present it to us, but obviously he is not.
Find the friendly skies.
I would recommend that we do nothing with this, and perhaps some one of us ought to look at the level of benefits and see if it does warrant increasing it. But I don't think it warrants an increase in exchange for a reduction of weeks.
Representative, okay, first Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the subject of raising the benefits, it's not for lack of trying. I think I've seen a few of those bills in recent years, and it also seems sort of counterintuitive to what Representative Turcotte's goal. You know, I'll give you more money, and if he's thinking that we're already giving them too much money, I'm not sure this holds up. But I do think that with the unemployment, people have a variety of incentives for employers as well. They offer to help pay for training or to make up the wage difference. They have very good programs to help people get back to work. If there's anything else that we might do for coordinating with industry and the department, I think that would be helpful. Of course, having more people of working age is another good step if we can find a way to do that. But I don't think I could support this bill.
Representative Schultz.
I believe unless another state has lowered their rate, we remain the lowest in the nation. And I will oppose this bill as well. And I could say a few other things, but I'll leave it there.
Come on in, Mike, just. Representative Drago. Granger, sorry. Looking at Mike, thinking of you, sorry.
We got two of them. So I actually like the idea of the bill. And the reason I like the idea of the bill is, maybe I break from a lot of the members here, but I actually do think that a responsible governance requires that we spend as little taxpayer dollars as possible. And seeing as they cannot give any unemployment benefits to anybody unless they take it from somebody else, I would like to reduce the amount that they're taking altogether. And so if this can result in less spending overall, then I would support it.
Representative Love.
Going way back, I think maybe in the 70s or so, the Massachusetts had a program where you could get an extension, and it was for times of extreme unemployment. And I don't know what the numbers were, whether they were 7, 8, 9%, whatever. If we tax something like that onto this, where we reduce, but if we hit a point where where there's a lot of unemployment and it's hard to get jobs, you could get a 6-week extension or whatever. How would people feel about that?
Boy, you put me on the spot. How do I feel? I feel tired because it's Friday.
Yeah. Just a thought.
No, that's what the conversation is about. Any other comments? All right, seeing none. For the record, the three individuals would be Infantine, Seaworth, and Granger. All right.
Where are they? What three?
Okay. I'm going to close the hearing and give you 2 minutes, and then we'll start with the next. Brian, refresh my memory is the next one. The firefighter one or the cannabis.
What if we do hit a bad recession? That extension? Only
Representative Sullivan, the three Republicans for the next bill, House Bill 82 FN, relative to employment protection for participants in therapeutic cannabis program, is Love, Colcom, and Infantine. Brian, sorry.
And ours are the same three: Cahill, Bouchard, and Leclerc. And by the way, Dan's name is Leclerc. The C is silent. Good. I learned that when I spent almost 20 years up in the North Country with the French Canadians in Berlin. So
Cahill, Bouchard, and Leclerc. So the House Bill 82 FN, relative to employment protection for participants in therapeutic cannabis program, had its impetus from a New Hampshire Supreme Court ruling that where an employee who was injured was provided, I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull up the bill, was let go because they were utilizing therapeutic cannabis for their injury, and the Supreme Court said, no, it is law, you're allowed to do it. And so we had a number of conversations about the Supreme Court ruling, what it said, what it meant, what we should do, and there were some disagreements. Well, I'm not going to say anything. And so there were some questions and some concerns about the bill, and that's why we had retained it. So it's open for discussion. Representative Sullivan, if you'd like, or Representative Seaworth, if you'd like. Either one of you gentlemen can start or wave off.
I'm happy to start. Mr. Chairman, you know that we've had conversations on the phone on this issue. And at one point, you know, the discussion had been over current employees who get a therapeutic cannabis card in the course of employment, and then the new employee who is just being hired with a therapeutic cannabis card. And you had suggested that perhaps we could cover the current employees and allow discrimination against the prospective employees. And the way I answered that is that all types of discrimination cover employees through the hiring process and through the course of employment. And I just can't envision, can't support dividing that out with this issue. If, you know, you can't discriminate against someone because of their race, their religion, their gender at the point of hire or throughout the course of employment. And on this issue, I would suggest that we need to do the same, that we need to bar discrimination through the hiring process as well as through the course of employment. So I feel strongly that way, and my feelings have not changed.
Representative Colcom.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if you.
I thought you wanted me to say something.
No, go
I'm
ahead.
ready.
No, go ahead. Representative Sullivan, followed by Colcom.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, you had mentioned the Supreme Court ruling. That was a discussion that you and I had, and it was one of my concerns with the language of the bill. It was brought up in testimony a number of times that the driver for this was that the law is not consistent with what the Supreme Court ruling was. So I dug out the Supreme Court ruling and tried to figure out what it said. And it is a little different than what I had anticipated from the discussion about it. The Supreme Court ruling does not say that you can't fire someone with a medical marijuana card, or even you can't fire someone because of a medical marijuana issue. What it says is that you have to treat it like any other workplace accommodation, so that someone has a medical marijuana card and the employer can still say, all right, here's what I will do to accommodate that person. Maybe anything from adjusting their schedule when they might be medicated, or maybe changing their duties from something that might be at risk for a federal license or whatever. But like other workplace accommodations, it doesn't simply say that you must, it says that you must weigh the cost of that accommodation with your business needs. So that was my concern with the language, is that I felt like the language in the bill didn't match the areas of the law that the Supreme Court's decision went down. And I asked for it to be interim study because I thought it might be more appropriate to match those two scenarios more closely.
Representative Colgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My position, unfortunately, is the complete opposite of Representative Sullivan, and we really are on opposite ends on this one. And where there's discussion regarding the discrimination and that we shouldn't have discrimination, unfortunately, with the amendment that was put through, there is outlined in discrimination in this, and that we have carved out specific positions that would be exempt from the non-hiring process, such as the police, the fire, the healthcare, federal DOT. There are specific positions exempt that would prohibit employers from hiring these people if they were to test positive solely for cannabis. And I don't think we should be, either we take out all exemptions or we allow the employers to make a decision based on the risk factors of their jobs that are available. I still feel strongly that we should not be having impaired electricians, HVAC mechanics, drivers who do not require a DOL card, and other people that are using high-risk equipment and other high-risk positions that we have. Those employers should be able to make a decision of who they're going to hire. And they don't know that when they're offering the job and they're placing this passing of a drug screening as a contingency of offer. So we either take all positions out and we do not discriminate, as Representative Sullivan pointed out, or we do allow employers to take their risks.
Representative Love. Oh, I'm sorry, gentlemen, I'll get you after it. Representative Love, Bouchard, and Cahill.
Right here, well, I've always argued about the workplace accidents and stuff, regarding this. And this here says, positive marijuana tests following workplace accidents are the highest in 25 years. Okay, because states are adopting this. I don't think New Hampshire should be falling into that trap. Workplace accidents, let's face it, that it's horrible. I've had to collect workers' comp, and it's no picnic, being hurt and laying there in bed and unable to earn a living, and then come back and you can only do half the job, and we've got to avoid that at all costs. And just I can't put my stamp of approval on anything that is going to make things worse.
That was it, Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to focus the idea that this is a medication with a prescription, and when you follow the prescription, you are not impaired. And basically what people are discussing about is people who are abusing the drug, and that's another issue. How I look at this bill is it just addresses that you cannot discriminate against someone for their prescription drug for employment. Thank you, Ms.
Representative Cahill.
Once again,
Mike.
Once again, Representative Bouchard has preempted my discussion. I got to get my hand up faster next time.
I'll start going Cahill, Bouchard.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Alphabetically and challenged. So, again, yeah, the bill does not provide that anyone can be impaired on the job. And I think if you were abusing alcohol or anything else, and your employer judged you to be impaired, that would be grounds for dismissal or certain. If you show up for an interview and you're drunk, I don't think that prospects are good. But it is a medication, and we're moving toward legalization. So I think a lot of this testing, other than for those positions where we agree that any degree of use of this would pose a risk. I think the tests are going to go away. But for now, certainly where you have a prescription because it helps you with pain, perhaps from a prior injury, and it helps you get a good night's sleep so that you can function at work and you're not impaired. I think this is something we should pass. Thank you.
Representative Granger, followed by, Drago, did I see your hand up? No, Representative Granger, followed by Love.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this seems like a freedom issue to me. I believe that ultimately, I believe in freedom of association. And so that means that just as somebody has the right to use marijuana if they want, someone else has a right not to associate with that as a result. And, I wouldn't just apply this to marijuana. I'd apply this to any prescription drug. And even though it's very unlikely that someone's going to be discriminated against for using ibuprofen, I believe that that is a right and a freedom that you have the right to do, just as it is your right to use ibuprofen. And therefore, I would oppose this bill because I support the right to associate with whomever you'd please.
Representative Love.
Because we cannot measure any degree of impairment, there's no tests available. I think we'll end up with, if there is an accident, the employer will be sitting there saying, you were stoned. And the employee say, no, I wasn't. Yes, you were. No, you weren't. We're opening a can of worms that we shouldn't be opening. The employer has to be able to say, I don't like your job performance, since you've been on this stuff, and be able to let that person go if he has to, or change his occupation. If you're making $30 an hour and your job performance isn't so good, and that employer should have the right to at least say, you've got to do this job over here and you're only going to get 20. We can't be telling employers how to run their business like that. There's safety issues here, and in the end, the employer is liable.
Representative Cahill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't believe the employer is barred from dismissing or disciplining someone who's negative performance. It's you just can't do it because you have a prescription card. So if I'm taking Thorazine and it's affecting my performance, you could still say, well, this isn't working anymore. And if I go to the labor board and you tell me you warned me and that my performance suffered, you cite examples, I'm going to lose. So it shouldn't be any different. I understand about the impairment as far as the roadside testing and everything, but if you're working with someone on a day-to-day basis and you see that they seem to be off, I think you'd have a reasonable presumption that this could be part of it and have a conversation with the employee. If the employee is able to address that and maybe adjust their dosage or the time that they use the cannabis, it can be worked out. I think employees are too valuable now that we should be denying them because of something that they are medically prescribed. And I think, again, in the future, it's going to be something that is there and legal for anybody over 21.
I want to interject at this point. I appreciate the passion, but as I brought up in the executive session, we need to get back to we're off on all these tangents about being stoned at work and being this, that, and the other. Let's get back to what combination of what the representatives Bryans have said. This, as we all know, there are rules about discrimination at the workplace. We also know that there's this accommodation that can be made if someone has a situation. Let's just take away drugs for a second, okay? Someone has a stroke, someone breaks their leg, there's a terrible motorcycle accident, breaks their leg, okay? They can no longer do what they were doing. Can the employer make a reasonable accommodation, whether it's a certain workstation or a certain chair or a certain whatever, to allow that individual to continue to work? The federal government has said you must, as an employer, make a reasonable accommodation. Okay? Now, what is reasonable? Well, it all depends. It's going to cost me, as an employer, $1,000 to buy you a better workstation where you can stand up and sit down and bring your keyboard up to your chest and do whatever, or work at on a assembly line and certain things. Is it going to cost you $1,000 to make that a reasonable accommodation, or is it going to cost you $25,000 to make that reasonable accommodation? And then you can discuss what is reasonable, what is not. So this thing came from a situation where we had a Supreme Court ruling, and Brian Sullivan is correct. Seaworth is correct. This was about reasonable accommodation. So let's bring it back down to what this was. Is it a reasonable accommodation to allow this individual to take therapeutic cannabis to be and to be working? And it was about a drug test. Okay, let's bring it back narrow again as to what the Supreme Court ruling. It's nice having a Supreme Court justice, former Supreme Court justice, a state representative, because I went over the ruling with him. So what does this say, and what does this doesn't say? Right. So following again, bringing this thing down narrow again. It said they must make a reasonable accommodation. Okay. Then you have to go to 126X. Okay, which is our therapeutic cannabis law. Okay, so you have to look at what it does, what it says, what it doesn't say, and you cannot be under the you have a, so bring it down to the drug test. Okay, I have to provide you a reasonable accommodation, and I cannot fire you if you test positive for a drug test. It doesn't say you can be under the influence on the job. It doesn't say you can have it in your possession in the workplace. It doesn't say these things, okay? So part of the reasonable accommodation from a safety standpoint, because, hey, I'm a workers' comp guy here, right? Dream and sleep, workers' comp, it's crazy. You don't want it, because the workers' compensation can deny a claim if you are impaired, if you are drunk, if you are under alcohol. Trust me, I've had cases where someone got killed. And boy, that drug test was not something anyone wanted to go to court about. Okay, and so bringing it down again here. You cannot have it on your pocket. You can't be smoking pot at work. You can't be under the influence. Bring it down to what the Supreme Court said in their ruling. Where I disagree with Representative Sullivan on this is, and I see where he's coming from, and I respect where he's coming from. I don't agree in this case. You don't want discrimination, okay? This is about a current employee making accommodation. This is not about making accommodations or making things for employees that have not been hired yet to allow them to get hired. And that's the only place we disagree. And Representative Colcom, isn't politics great when you're trying to make make law where you don't want discrimination, but we've already discriminated because fire, police, and emergency, they don't want it. They don't want this, and they don't want that in their ranks. Okay, so we're gonna exclude something. So yeah, welcome to the world of trying to make a bill that works for everybody, or a law that works for everybody. So I would like to pass a law that is consistent with what the New Hampshire Supreme Court said. Because if we don't, we look foolish. The Supreme Court has overruled us in their jurisdiction as a judicial branch of our three branches. We're the legislative branch. Okay? Normally we kind of should listen to what they say and kind of bring the law into conformity. I guess we could do the opposite. We could look at their ruling and say you're full of water. We're going to put another bill in that takes away the authority of your ruling and makes it no longer null and void because of a new law. I'm not sure we need to do that either. But those are the things in front of us. So, Representative Love, I respect the fact that you don't want people to be under the influence of work. That's not what the bill allows. It's about a reasonable accommodation. And so I'm happy to have this big, broad discussion, but just try to bring it back to where it is. And I will also say one last thing. We're all well aware of what kind of a legislature we have. It's a good legislature because it's very close, it's very divided, so you get the best of all legislation. Something on either, well, no, something, some of the stuff on one way side on that side isn't gonna pass. Something on that way side, that side's not gonna pass. All right, because if you don't have the votes, if you do have the votes for the House, then you gotta go to the Senate. So if we do pass a bill, which I would like to, a very narrowly focused bill based on the Supreme Court, based on the accommodations, based on all these things, I would like to pass something out of the House that's going to pass in the Senate. So keep that in mind, that passing something out of one body that has no chance in the other bodies, it makes a point, but sometimes it's a waste of time as well. So I've said very little with too many words, but let's kind of keep it narrow and get it back to what the Supreme Court ruling is and the accommodation aspect. Representative Holcomb, followed by Sullivan and Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would like to share that I am prepared to fully support this bill if we can put an amendment through that takes out just the piece of the new hire and leave everything else as it is, but take out the piece of the new hire, and I will absolutely compromise and support this bill.
I agree, and I've relayed that to Representative Sullivan in a very polite and cordial, the way he and I always talk on the phone. And we haven't had a meeting of the minds yet, but I do understand and I support what you're saying, Representative Sullivan and then Love.
And I do respect the perspective of my Republican friends. With regard to the Supreme Court case, Supreme Court case dealt with the specific facts of a single case. That individual happened to be employed at the time that the issue arose. That's why the Supreme Court only dealt with currently employed individuals. They never like to broaden the decision to cover all kinds of other issues that aren't presently before them. I would anticipate that if there was a new case where someone was discriminated against at the point of hire, solely because they have a therapeutic cannabis card, I think they would also say that's not okay either. But I agree, this Supreme Court case doesn't deal with that issue, but I believe this bill should. Supreme Court cases don't necessarily drive legislation. It justifies this legislation just to a certain degree, but I continue to believe that this ought to cover people at the point of hire and during the course of employment. Thank you.
Representative Love, followed by Sullivan. Seaworth, why am I doing that?
Thank you. Just like Representative Holcomb, I don't like the idea of the government jumping into who you can hire and who you can't, and who you can refuse to hire. Also, the Supreme Court ruling doesn't give it doesn't give the employer any rights at all. It more or less takes away. If an amendment came forth that would allow an employer to say, okay, you can't do this job, but you can do this one, and you're going to get $10 an hour less or whatever. Give the employer back a little power in this, because once again, if somebody's even a little bit, stoned, let's use the word what it is, it could affect the job safety of many, and if somebody's operating, say, a forklift operator in a warehouse, okay, you don't want somebody that's impaired. And, so now you give them a broom and say, here, clean the place, but you're not gonna get that wage. If we had an amendment to do that, I'd be okay.
Thank you, Representative Love. Representative Seaworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My fellow Brian brought up a point about Supreme Court rulings in the law that I haven't worked on another committee besides labor, but to me, it seems like labor in some ways is different. And that's part of the reason why this bill was brought forward and part of the reason why it is necessary to have us align with what the Supreme Court already said is the difference in what would happen. Right now, if someone violates the Supreme Court, an employer violates the Supreme Court ruling, the employee can take that case to court, and almost certainly any court will use the Supreme Court ruling as precedent. What they can't do is go to the Labor Department, who follows the laws that we write for them. So to me, the importance of backing a Supreme Court ruling might be more in this committee than some other committees. And that's so that future employees who find themselves in the same boat and would have a case in the courts don't have to undergo that expense because we've told the Labor Department to follow the same rules that the courts would. And that's that's not an argument to put more or less or take something out, but to me, that was an important message about what we're trying to do here with this bill.
Thank you. Representative McKenzie.
Couple of quick things. With all due respect to my colleague, Representative Love, I object to the characterization of people on medical marijuana as stoned. It is a term that is used to, to suggest that somebody is impaired, and that's not necessarily the case. Let me also say, deviate just a tad, is that medical marijuana will be introduced in the workers' comp environment. No doubt. It'll be used as part of a cocktail of therapy that is be available to people to return them to work.
It already is.
And so the idea that somebody can't get in the door, and no disrespect to you, Representative, but the idea they can't get in the door, but they can use these kinds of this kind of therapy to return to work, and in fact save the employer a considerable amount of money because they've been able to go back to work. So I think this has, I think when we look at medical marijuana, we need to do it in the context of it is a therapy. It is a part of a therapy, and for those who are injured or those who are trying to maintain a good life, I think it has a place in this. And I support the concept of it. And let me say this: I was a firefighter and a captain for a long time. I dealt with a whole lot of people over the course of my time. And if somebody was impaired, they were going home. That was it. And they're impaired. If you're attentive to what's going on as an officer or as a manager, they're impaired. But I never went to a firefighter the day he walked in the door and said, by the way, I think you could be impaired. You might possibly be impaired at some point down the line. I took it based on what I observed as a manager in a department. So I think it really turns on impairment. And to bar somebody from the beginning of their career, to take that away from them, to deny them that opportunity to be able to be employed in various occupations, I think it's harsh. And I think in the context of where we are with this treatment program and the fact that the state has recognized this, that it is part of a program of restoring people to normalcy and getting them back to work and getting them in a position where they can function well. So I would disagree respectfully with my colleagues and I would support this legislation, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Cahill, you sure? Nope, we're gonna get you before Bouchard. Representative Cahill, followed by Colton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I imagine that, you have a job and you're injured at the job, you get workers' comp, and then for whatever reason, you leave the job. So now you have a medical marijuana card and you're applying for a job and you can't get it because because you're going to fail the test. I don't think we want that. So I mean, again, as I said earlier, I think the testing is going to go away unless it's the situations where it is a real potential risk. So I think we can pass the bill, with this amendment that 2023-0785H and be done with it. In anticipation of a Supreme Court ruling, if it should come to pass, I think that would be on the right side of it.
Representative Colton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to respond to the comment since my name was brought up. I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying. When an employer has a group of employees, they learn what their work ethic's like, what their skills are like, what their safety practices are like, and everything else. There's a known entity there. And if somebody gets injured or somebody has to go into therapeutic cannabis, they have some basis to measure their performance on whether or not it's been affected. They have a relationship there that they may be willing to accommodate based off of the circumstances of the employment. Many factors can come into place. With regard to a new hire, you're going on good faith through an interview process that maybe goes as long as 3 hours when you consider the different people that may be involved in the interview process. So there's no known benchmark. It's all in good faith. It's all in what this person is coming forward with. And of course, we all, make ourselves sound much better than we actually are. We fake it till we make it when we get that new job. That's been known for years. Everybody comes in that way. I'm not saying that that we're writing a law that says the employers must not hire. I'm saying that I don't want to tie their hands and to take that option away from them based on the risk factors of the jobs that they have available. If I have an administrative job that is low risk on my workers' comp or on that person's safety, I may say, you know what, I'm okay. I'm going to take this risk. But when I have a job with an electrician who's dealing with high voltage or a crane operator, well, they may need a federal, again, this is still a federal offense. Marijuana is still not legal at the federal level, so we can't even have a crane operator. An HVAC technician who is working on roofs and also working in high voltage equipment. That may be a risk I don't want to take because I want that employee to go home at the end of the day to his family. So I am just saying that I don't want to tie the employer's hand. I want to leave it to their discretion at the new hire process because the new hire process is still all on good faith based off of an interview process where we all put our best foot forward. Everything else, if they're working there and they go on to therapeutic cannabis, all of that stuff comes out, that's something that's already a relationship built with that employer and employee.
Representative Granger.
Thank you. So going off of that, considering that the unemployment rate is incredibly low, if an employer is discriminating based on whether or not someone is prescribed to marijuana or has a medical cannabis card, then that's their loss. I don't see how we need to add to the pile by saying, oh, it's illegal to discriminate in that manner. They're losing out on a potentially good employee. If all that you guys are saying is true, that this person is, totally capable of doing the job, they're not a workplace liability because they're not abusing the drug, they're merely using it, okay, then the punishment in the market for not hiring that person is you don't have a good employee. It doesn't make any sense to pile onto that and say, well, now we're going to have discrimination laws that prevent you from making a wise, sound decision as you're best capable of making such a decision. That just doesn't make any sense. You need to allow people to make their own choices. You need to allow people to be free to just decide to do whatever they're going to do. And if it's a mistake, that's their mistake. We all have the right to make mistakes.
Yeah, my dad told me I made a lot. Representative Sullivan.
And just a point of order, It's been a long time since we had the executive session on this bill, and I had to look myself to figure out what's the status of this bill. We've had 3 votes so far on this one. The first was to pass the amendment, so the amendment is passed. The one that Representative Cahill mentioned has passed the committee. We have also had a 10-10 vote on OTPA, and we've also had a 16-4 vote on retain. So just as we come back together, we've got to finish the process. The amendment doesn't need to be voted on again. We've passed it already. So that's where we're at so far.
I'm going to make some comments this moment, please. The Supreme Court of New Hampshire has also stated that what's the word I'm looking on? Not diagnosis. The treatment for workplace injuries can be, a doctor can prescribe medical marijuana. Okay, insurance companies do have to, if a doctor prescribes it, insurance companies do have to pay for it. So that's also something that's been passed. Marijuana is a part of our environment. I went to a concert last night, so I'm sure with the people around me, I'm sure I probably test positive right now somewhere. But the employers have to make and are making changes. If the employers that I deal with will tell me right now, if they drug test their employees, they would lose half their employees. Many of them are taking marijuana out of the off of the not good list. I mean, it has to be past marijuana. It has to be an opioid, a cocaine. It has to be something else before they're not going to hire someone. So they're kind of the bar has been moved, and people don't even consider the marijuana anymore. So we are in an environment that's changing. We all understand that. Okay, and we're trying to figure out these laws with this new environment, and I don't think anyone around here, I think we all agree that there are certain very positive medicinal purposes for marijuana. The Native Americans knew something that we didn't a long time ago, so, and I only said that because they were the ones that kind of grew wild in the West. So anyway, so I understand there's all these different things that we're trying to take from society and safety and this new realm of therapeutic uses and all the great things that it can do for you. And I understand the struggle here. And I just don't want to take something and try to expand it out past what it is. Over the years in this committee, we have seen legislation, don't check the box, okay? No longer have a box if you can be convicted of a felony, okay? Wanted to get rid of that. No longer can ask this. You can't take you can't ask someone to take or for a credit check unless a whole list of exclusions, except if you touch money or in charge of money, work for the nuclear power plant, blah, 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 all these other things. So we've seen all these things, and just think about this for a second. Maybe the fact that we have not had all these things have allowed employers to do things that they feel are important for their businesses, which is why we have such a low unemployment rate. I'm just throwing that out there, that giving employers the ability to do what they want to do. Guess what? They make decisions if they're going to hire someone with a felony or not. And many of them are saying that's okay. We're going to give them a chance. Maybe we're going to take a drug test, but we're not going to include marijuana in that drug test anymore because that's okay. And that flexibility. So I don't want to expand things past what they are. And I'm going to really kind of, for myself personally, adhere this down to, let's follow what the Supreme Court said and try to craft legislation as best we can toward that. You want to put another bill in specifically for lack of discrimination, I would say try to do that. But I don't like to pile on when we don't have to. Representative Love, and then I'm going to wrap this up in the next 5 minutes for everybody, but everyone, obviously, if you really need something to say, really want to say something, please feel free to raise your hand. Representative Love?
Okay, I want to apologize to anybody I offended with using the word stoned. I should have used impaired, and not to pile excuses on it. I do have a condition where sometimes I have a hard time grabbing a word. I know what I want to say. Impaired didn't come to mind. And I knew it. I should have been using something else, but
David, we've been using that word since we were kids.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that was the word.
Well-
that was the word back then. I believe, and there's no one here older than me, I don't think, but I actually believe stoned. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Bouchard, you got me. Actually believe the word stoned was originally a word for being drunk. Is that accurate?
The wonderful Ray Charles had a song, "Let's Go Get Stoned,"
Yeah,
and it was about alcohol,
drinking, yes.
I think.
Anyway, thank you, Representative Love. Any other further comments?
No,
All right,
it's a different song.
we all know where we stand. We all know what we want to get passed, and we're all gonna have to compromise a little to get something passed. So we'll take this into our next meeting, but thank you. Excellent conversation, everybody. So thank you very much. Moving on to, where I just had my schedule. Moving on to I call the firefighter bill. House Bill 182. Prohibiting discharge of volunteer firefighters or volunteer emergency medical technicians from other employment. This bill has come to us twice. It came to us last session and it was killed. It came to this session, we modified a bit, and has to do with, we have full-time firefighters, we have volunteer firefighters in some of our smaller communities, and it is important that they're available when needed in an emergency. Wanting to have some protection if an employee is late to work or unable to show up to work, that they will not be fired because of performing that duty if they are in a volunteer situation. I have spoken to the head of the Fire Chiefs Association about this. I know I contacted the lobbyists for the association. I know the association had a meeting last week. Because specifically of that, is there any comments that would like to be made to the committee at all? Jody, please. Please come up.
I'll be very brief. For the record, my name is Jody Grimbalis, and we represent the New Hampshire Association of Fire Chiefs. We did bring this up to them in the past and did bring it to them recently before their last meeting. And it was decided at the time that they're going to continue to monitor this situation. They're not taking a position because they do have individual chiefs with different perspectives. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Obviously, the full-time fire chiefs and the chiefs with volunteers have a different perspective on the law or on the proposed law and the circumstance. So I'm not going to. I'll save my comments for the end. I will open it up to anyone's comments, Vice Chairman or the Minority Leader.
I'll get to this earlier rather than later. I'm looking at the score sheet here. We voted on 2 amendments in executive session, 0990 and 0979. Both of those amendments came to a 10-10 vote, so neither of them passed. We also voted on ought to pass, and that was an 8-12 vote, and the retain was 17-3, just so we know where it stands. I'll continue for a second.
Please do.
I guess I guess I feel exactly the way the police or the fire chiefs do. I'm trying to figure out if this is a bill that we really need or not. And they're not sure. And I'm scratching my head because I'm not sure. If there's a need, I think we should try to find a way to address the need. But I just am flummoxed.
Representative Sullivan. Gee, Dan, oh man. Representative Seaworth.
Thank you, Chairman Daniels.
Yeah, wow. Wow. That was the previous chairman years ago. Yeah, wow. That was a good one, huh, Jody? He got me. Go ahead.
So I've probably gotten a little tiresome with my example about the airline pilot. In part because it is a little out there. I don't think it could ever happen. But since that discussion, one thing that has been brought up is about the employee who is a full-time firefighter. And that not only can happen, I'm sure it does. I'm imagining, I know from talking with our fire people, especially the younger firefighters and probably some of the older ones too, really like the larger departments where they can get the 3 on 4 off shifts. That's very desirable for a certain segment. So I am quite sure there are firefighters who live in a smaller town but work in a nearby city to get a full-time job and the better shift. And it would be perfectly reasonable for on those 4 days when you're not working to be on call with your local fire department. It's a win for everybody. You get an experienced person helping out where they need it. It doesn't interfere with the job. But, and I'll look to some of the members here who have spent a career in firefighting, it seems to me that when you have those 3 days on shift, that your fire chief should have some say in whether you're going to be there on time or whether you're going to leave early, or whether there's an expectation that when you've been on for 12 hours, you don't go and stay up the whole night before you come back for another 12 hours. And reading between the lines with the fire chiefs, I would imagine that there is a difference of opinion, that some people are willing to accommodate. Some departments are willing to accommodate more, others less. Some of them probably have very strict that on those 3 days you're on shift, you are here on time and you stay for the whole shift. And in this case, it's not a matter of, well, they're out there saving a life as a volunteer. That's what they're doing in their full-time job as well. Just on the last bill, we talked about, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned a number of cases where we've left it to employers to each figure out how to walk that line. And there are different solutions, and I think the employment environment is better for that. And to me, this bill tries to come up with one size fits all, one way to go. And I believe that the fire chiefs, despite having a range of opinions, each one of those opinions is going to be valid. So like my namesake said, I'm concerned that we're not there with what the problem is, what this solution would do, and whether we're on the right path with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, gentlemen, flip a coin. Representative Cahill, Bouchard, then I would like to hear from some of the professional firefighters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think the problem that we're trying to address, the reason the bill came to us is because there is a problem recruiting and retaining people for the volunteer. But I'm not sure if this is the solution to it, because I talked to my fire chief, and his biggest challenge is that, people that are living in town are working 20, 30, 40 miles away. So they're not really able, if they were willing, to come back and answer a call in our town. So I'm not sure. I'm just looking at the municipal association to try to find out what the towns are doing to incentivize or encourage. And I guess it's a mixed bag, and we don't want to mandate anything, but as far as help with the training and again, if you're a professional firefighter, you're getting the training that you need to go back and serve the community where you reside, which I think is a win-win. But I don't know if there's something about scheduling, which, you're available to answer the call, and if you can't, then you don't. But you do have the compulsion to go and save that life. So I'm not sure if this is something we can address in labor. But again, this gets back to having more young people who can climb these ladders and yet fit it into their work and life schedule.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Cahill. Before you speak, Representative Bouchard. Representative, I know you're itching to talk, and although this is a retained session, I'm going to let you speak in a couple of minutes. I'd like everyone to have their conversation, if you would like, because I know what it's like sitting there when people are talking about a bill you want. So we're going to be a little flexible here, but I'm going to let everyone say their piece for a little bit first. So I will recognize you. All right, Representative Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll keep it brief. I'm looking at the scenario that if you are a business owner and choose to start your business in a community that does not have a full-time fire department, I think you need to accommodate for your volunteer fire department, volunteer firefighters. And that's why I will support this bill.
Okay. Representative Drago, I know you wanted to be on this committee. I'm going to let you speak if you have something to say.
Sure. As the bill is written now, it's hard to support, and I don't know if it's better to pile on amendments to make the bill better, or if it's better to collectively get ideas and then just create a new one. But I agree with what Representative Bouchard was saying, that if you are in a community that doesn't have it, then yes, it's good to help out. I don't think we need to legislate and force businesses to do that. And like what Representative Seaworth said, it's a one size fits all, and I don't think it's going to fit everybody with the way the bill's written, because if I'm in a town that pays for fire service and I'm already paying my taxes, but I have an employee that lives in the next town over that doesn't, well, why am I paying taxes and also losing an employee at the same time? So that's just an example of how it doesn't fit every situation. I do agree there's a recruiting issue, but I don't think forcing businesses to lose employees to staff a fire agency is a way to do it, or any emergency responder for that matter. Because there's two ways to do it. One, you either pay taxes and the town hires employees, which we all know is not feasible in some of these small towns. But at the same time, a small business who has 2 employees shouldn't have to lose a day's wage of one of their employees, who's now not providing for his family, but also the business owner may not be making enough money off the day for, to keep his doors open or whatever the situation is. So I do have ideas on how to fix it, but I don't know if that's the.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, a few things. So I was hoping Representative Pratt was going to be here. Representative Cahill and I talked to him after the last meeting, after the last House session, and he was a fire chief for 29 years. And a few of his ideas were in the bill, it could only be that if you work for a private company, you're only allowed to respond to structure fires. That will narrow down how often the employee needs to be gone, rather than, maybe not for the car accident, so forth, but just for the big emergencies. An idea I had is we need to incentivize businesses. If they're going to give up an employee for the day, why is the town maybe not vehicle registrations or something saying, hey, you're getting half price vehicle registration, or it shouldn't be only the business paying or not suffering, but they shouldn't be the only one that has a skin in the game to staff a town's fire agency. It should be, maybe this is the town saving the money on the payroll, but maybe a portion of the, property tax or something. There's some sort of discount, some sort of business tax, something that's kicked back. There also needs to be some sort of minimum employee amount. A company that only has 2 employees is a lot different. I think I said this in the hearing. It's a lot different than a company that has 100 employees, you know, a Walmart can probably lose the cashier for a few hours, whereas if you're an employer that has 2 employees and you need both of them to lift something heavy, well, now you're standing around waiting for the guy to show up. So I was thinking a minimum amount of 10 employees. This is only for 10 or more employees. And then maybe do it that a business is only required if they have 10 employees, one of them could be a volunteer firefighter. If it's 20 employees, maybe 2 volunteers. So it's a tiered system, so they're not losing a bunch of their workforce, and it's based off how many employees are in the company. So
Based on that, I have a question for you, because I was thinking a little differently. I don't care so much if a building burns down. I care about the child who's choking, the person who's having a heart attack, the people trapped in a car accident, that getting to those things quicker versus, you know, it's always that thing where as long as people are out of the building type of thing, then, well, surround the building and don't let it go anywhere. You know, the building could be rebuilt, but so I'm surprised you're from a structure fire, and I'm more concerned with the emergency medical situation.
and I'm certainly not a professional at this. I own a landscape business, but that would probably be a question for some of the people who have done this before. It sounded like the structure fire is where they need more personnel, whereas responding to a choking or something like that, there's usually somebody that can do that. It's more of the all hands on deck situations that they need the volunteers to be at. So but I don't know. That would be a question for people who actually do this.
Well, I would like, I don't want to put either of you two gentlemen on the spot, but you are the professionals. You've had plenty of experience. So if you would rather opine, I would like to hear it.
I would just say, and I think Mark will agree with me. I've been retired 7 years in the fire service, and the 7 years has changed drastically. I served 29 years. Mark's been, you know, in Manchester for a long time, retired. And I think the recruitment process, there's a lot that goes into it. Recruitment, retention, and the full-time firefighting. So I believe there probably is a problem getting volunteers. Matter of fact, I had a conversation with my wife's uncle on this very subject, because I think that we had a bill when Brody DeShays put in the bill. There was an issue up in the Rumney area, Wentworth area, where they aren't getting people responding to the call. So they asked if there was something they could do. And I said, there'll probably be a bill coming forth. But I think there's a delicate balance here in how we do that. You know, it's, you know, people, when they're employed, again, there's a fine balance as to, you know, do you hold the employers accountable for not allowing these people to go? I don't believe that, you know, you can really do that. I mean, they have a business to run, and I understand the whole thing. How we fix this problem, I don't know, because it appears that there's less and less people that are interested in the fire service in a full-time position, never mind volunteering. I mean, I can tell you that when I'm looking at I have good friends down in Ash still, and I look at the roster, and from 7 years ago, there's probably 100 people that have retired since I've been gone. And so you know, it seems like every year they're putting on new people. They just had they hired 12 new people, but the list that they use, it appears are getting smaller and smaller. So there are people that are losing interest in these positions for whatever reason it is. So if they're having problems in the full-time positions, I understand there's a problem with recruiting people to volunteer. You know, on call, some of those people get paid. Volunteers, they're just doing it because it may be a hobby to them. So is it a big problem? I don't know how big a problem it is. I don't know what the answer is, but I think we definitely need to have, you know, there's got to be a delicate balance there somewhere along the line.
Well, I participated over the years in, I was in fire prevention for a while, over studies about how they rate insurance. And part of the way they rate insurance is they figure what is capacity? What can you deliver to the scene? How far are the trucks away from the location? How many firefighters you have? And all that's an assessment that's done, and all that is boiled down and becomes a rate. Um, so, so there, these assessments are taking place, and I'm sure at town meetings, they're having the same discussion. It's all about risk. It's all about how much risk you want to take. You could hire EMS people, put them on full-time. You could hire firefighters and put them all on full-time. But when you don't make that commitment, then you are assuming a certain amount of risk. Now, everybody thinks that risk is assigned to somebody else until it's your house or until it's your family that's in big trouble. And then they think, you know something, we probably should have kicked the tax rate up a little bit and brought somebody on full-time. So in these towns where they're doing this, and there are many towns that are making this decision. And to bring a firefighter on today, it's north of $75,000. You know, that's about what you're north of that. In Manchester, it's even higher. EMS people are probably in the 50 range. So it's expensive to do that. So the patchwork that we have of trying to fill those holes and minimize some of the risk is this volunteer fire department environment. And it's not ideal. It's not ideal. And the more complicated the service gets, the more emergency medical stuff that comes on, the busier these communities get, the higher the population rates get, the more pressure that puts on the volunteer system, and the more of an ask there is for businesses in these various communities. So I think, I think we could do this. We could say, firefighters should have the right to get out, but this is going to come to a head at some point. And firefighters are gonna, and communities are gonna, businesses are gonna start pushing back, saying, look, we should not have to assume all this responsibility, that it should be somebody spread around the community for this. Otherwise, maybe we'll think about going somewhere else. And let me say to my colleague who's who owns a business and runs a business, and the idea that half of his crew could potentially leave and go somewhere, that's a big deal. That a lot of small employers in this community that would just shut the business down. So it's a very tough call right now.
Let's break down the bill as to what it says here, okay? No employer shall discharge or take any other disciplinary action against any employee by reason of failure of such employee to report to work at the commencement of such employee's regular working hours, where the failure is due to the employee's responding to an emergency in his or her capacity as a volunteer member of a fire department or ambulance department. So what we're saying is the bill is about disciplinary action and discharge. Okay? So with the point of, if people are, it doesn't say that I have to let them go halfway through the day if there's a fire call. Okay, that's up to the employee to decide now, right now. This is about failure to such employee to show up for work at the commencement of their period. That's what the bill says. So narrow it down to what it is trying to do. The discussion, bone of contention between Representative Adjun and I was the concept of discharge or disciplinary action. My initial thought was, okay, you can't discharge him. Okay, can't fire him for that. But where do we have that discharge versus disciplinary action? Does the employer have some ability to have some disciplinary action because you don't want someone milking the thing? Okay. Yeah, every morning I don't feel like going to work, so if there's a call, I'm going to go. And when does it become abuse? So that's all we're trying to do is narrow this. So I think we all agree that something probably should be done, and no one wants to be the one whose neighbor, friend, family, or whatever can't get the services they need because they weren't volunteer firefighters. No employer shall discharge or take any disciplinary action against. I am in favor of not discharging. I have a little agita over any kind of discipline because I do still think the employer needs to do something. Representative Adjun was like, yeah, Will, but 3 or 4 disciplines can equal a discharge. And my point was, no, you can't discharge. Period. End of story. Even if you got 20 disciplines, you can't discharge. So I would like to work on that aspect of this to try to see if we can come up with something without getting really, big and telling employers and towns and everyone what to do. Hit that and just decide between the discharge and the disciplinary and try to figure that out. I will give you a second, but I saw Representative Granger first, Sullivan, and Drago. As I saw the hands. Go ahead, Representative Granger.
Thank you. This is just a question. Might it be better just to make enabling legislation to allow municipalities to decide how to handle this on their own instead of us saying that we have to make a statewide level rule that has to apply everybody in Coos County as well as Nashville and Manchester? Like, it seems to me as though if we let the municipalities sort of figure it out, then they would probably figure out a much better system than whatever we can come up with.
But this isn't for municipalities. This is employer-employee relationship. So we can't have a municipality tell an employer relationship what it should be. Well, okay, but if you want, Brian, a second. I just want to be able to look at Representative Granger. Sorry. So that's my thought of where you're going. Do you still agree or disagree? Go ahead. Just have this.
So can towns not make any rules for businesses at all?
Boy, that would be a stretch.
Okay.
I think beyond zoning, planning board things and stuff like that, I don't think any municipality has any kind of authority to have any kind of rule over employee-employer relationship. Representative Sullivan, followed by Drago.
I absolutely hear what you're saying about someone who's stretching the limits, and why you might want to take the discipline piece out of it. However, if discipline can never lead to discharge, what's the point? I mean, and then my other concern is if you've got 25, if you've got 25 disciplinary letters based on firefighting, and then you're late to work one day, can you discharge for being late to work with the record of 25 disciplinary letters? You still have the discharge.
I will let some other people speak and I'll respond to that. I just don't want to give, but I think I have a legitimate response to that, but go ahead.
Okay. And I'd also say if Representative Wolf has some enlightenment to offer, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Representative Drago speak as the people, and then in love. But Representative, if you want to get ready, Representative Wolf, if you want to get ready to speak in a few moments, so I'm just gonna grab the people that have their hands up, and then we'll let you say something. Representative Drago.
Well, I should have raised my hand before Representative Sullivan because he was like what happened over there. Same concept. But I was thinking the same thing. Well, first off, I do understand that if it's during the day, you can tell the employee, no, you can't go. We're busy.
That has nothing to do with that.
I know what you're saying.
Okay.
What if it's at 4 a.m.? This is my question. What if it's at 4 a.m.? Their shift starts at 6. Do they call their boss and say, hey, can I go? So they have to call.
No.
Okay. So what now? But if they're late,
you just can't fire them.
So we can't
According
fire
to
them.
the bill, you can't fire or discharge or discipline.
Okay, so that's where I'm getting to. So now, my business, we have a 5-strike policy. Basically, first offense, second offense for being late. Well, after the 5th offense or the 25th offense, what's good to have a strike policy if there's no consequence at the end? So what if you can't discharge an employee for being late over and over and over again? Well, what's the incentive for them to ever show up on time in the first place? So I don't know. Our consequence for the strike policy is you're terminated. But if you take that away, what else can I do?
The way I will respond to both Representative Sullivan and you on this is you cannot fire them or discipline them the way the bill says now for not showing up. However, you must, provide evidence that that's where you were, and you are not required to compensate them, and you must provide from the chief evidence of that's what you were doing. Now, I do think there are other reasons. If someone is late, first of all, you have to look at the people that are firefighters, okay? They're a very special ilk of people, all right? And they do something that most of us wouldn't do, or have the ability to do. I don't see them as overall milkers of any kind of situation. I mean, I'm going to sit there and not work at my desk today so I can run into a burning building and get hot and sweaty, maybe get burned and killed, and to try to save someone's life. I mean, so first of all, I don't see them as much as the milkers. Secondly, what is the reason for the discipline and not discharge? Well, let's say someone, I don't want to discharge them, but I still can discipline someone for other things. Okay, you didn't do your job well. Any kind of reasons. Trying to kind of lost my train of thought. Here's where I'm going. You're kind of what you're saying, and what we were saying, Representative Sullivan says, well, if you can't discharge them, then what good is a discipline? Or if there's so many disciplines, I don't think you should discipline someone for being late or going to a fire. You can discipline them for all other reasons and possibly fire them for discipline for other reasons, failure to do your job and other things. But I'm not sure that putting the two together, that's my problem. I think you're trying to put them both together, and I'm trying to delineate them. Yeah, sure. I want to have this conversation.
You just said you shouldn't be able to discipline someone for being late because they're at a fire. That's what the bill says. You shouldn't discipline them for being late because they're at a fire. At what point would you discipline someone because of their being late? Because they're at a fire? Because what you're saying is take discipline out, but I can't see why you need to take discipline out.
Because you have to have that ability. I'm sorry to say that I feel the employer needs to have the ability, if they feel that it's being abused. I don't think those people are the type of people that abuse things, but I still think if someone is abusing them, there needs to be some mechanism should someone be doing that. That's the only reason I'm wary about putting that in.
But it doesn't say only in cases of abuse. Basically, if the employer is annoyed because there's been 5 fires in the last 2 weeks, they could discipline because they're annoyed, not because there's abuse.
So let's redefine after the word discharge, or take any disciplinary, let's redefine what you want to do there. So you and I both get what we want with a couple different sentences, Representative Drago person and
Yeah, I was basically going to say the same thing again. I'm not saying they're going to go fight a fire and then run to Dunkin's and say, you know what, I'm going to kill another hour. I don't think that's the case. I think it's responsible people who are going to get back to their job as quickly as possible. What I'm saying is, if I have a job that needs to be done by Friday, I stand to lose money if it doesn't get done, and there happens to be 3 emergencies that week in the morning. Well, now I'm getting a little frustrated that my employee is gone. Even if he comes in right after the fire or whatever the emergency is, I still lost time that morning, which is slowing my job down. And I should have the ability as an employer to say, this situation isn't working. Maybe they don't get fired right away.
agreed, which is why one of my amendments was, if you show up late, but if this does not say, and which we can add in, it does not say that your employer can tell you when you cannot. If you have a situation where you have a bunch of perishable stuff that has to be planted that day,
Right.
okay, or you're working for IT and you're turning the whole company over that day, okay, you can't be late that day. You can't go to the fire that morning because of that. It does not say that the employer can't tell you on certain times. No, you can't do that. You're not going to be late tomorrow.
That was a question I had asked, because if it's 4 a.m. and they get a call, is there a call to the boss saying, hey, what's going on for today's schedule? Is it okay if I take this? Or are they just automatically showing up late? And that's what needs to be differentiated. There needs to be a give and take amongst the employer and the employee and plus the town, because if I'm just finding out at 6:30 in the morning that my employee's not going to be in for the day, or not the day, for the next 2 hours, without a phone call first to say, hey, can I take this? Can I go? Then that's the problem. And then if I don't have disciplinary measures to take after that, well, you just tied my hands completely.
Again, that's why I'm trying to narrow it down between discharge, discipline, and then what the employer can do by agreeing it or not agreeing to it, depending on certain.
And
things.
what if they try it for 5 months? Say I have an employee tomorrow that does this, and we try for 5 months, and I say, this isn't really this doesn't work. I didn't know beforehand. Now I know. Now what do I do?
It doesn't say anything in the bill. It says, you know, it's silent. So again, if you want to add a few sentences to something that says, however, the employer can,
Say no to the
Yeah.
you can't take the calls anymore.
Yeah.
And that, but I still can't get rid of them. So if they, I guess my
No.
question is, if you can't ever part ways because something's not working, the employee
you
can
can
just say,
tell them they can't go on certain, well, again, this is what we're getting down to the rub, and I'm gonna pull Representative Wolf in, but Granger had his hand up
Okay.
one more time. We're getting down to the real things as to what the employer can do. If you're gonna put something in place mandating an employer can't discipline or discharge, you should be able to put other things in there that give the employer the ability to say when they can or when they can't.
so I could just say, well, we don't work weekends, so you can just do it on the weekends.
Possibly. Well, it
Okay.
doesn't matter.
Well, then I would be
If-
okay with that. That
Well,
would
I
make
mean,
sense.
Again,
Yeah.
this is a big thing
Right.
we're trying to bring down small.
Just
If-
it's hard without having. It's hard to do this without saying the ultimate thing is we part ways, because unless it just, as the business owner, it's very hard to understand a situation where I can't say, no, this just isn't working. Like this is, you could basically say that for anything, but I could go to any one of my employees tomorrow and say, you know what? I own the business. This just isn't working. We're going to part ways. But now we're writing a bill that says I can't do that for this specific situation. That's very tough. And I'm not the one to say, I'll just come up with some other reasons to get rid of them. I'm going to be honest and say, this is the reason. I'm not going to say, well, I just don't like your job performance for the afternoons. You're slow or whatever. No, I'm not going to do that. If this is the reason, that's what I'm going to say. I'm not going to skirt the issue by saying this is the reason. It's just very hard to figure out a way that it makes sense as an employer that I'm, in a better word, I'm stuck with the employee. Like no other positions like that. I don't understand why this bill would do the same thing.
That's why you're paid the big bucks to make these tough decisions.
guess
Representative
so.
Granger, then followed by Representative Wolf. Is it okay, Mike, if I have Representative Wolf come up after? Representative Granger, and then Representative Wolf.
So thinking about everything you just said, there's one real obvious thing to do as an employer to sort of sidestep this whole issue and never deal with it, and that's just never hire a fireman. And that seems to be an obvious solution that we don't want to encourage. It doesn't seem to be if the goal of the legislation is to get people to volunteer for fire service, and you're putting them in a situation where they can go through the math and realize, well, if any potential employer down the road knows that I'm a fireman and they can't fire me or whatever, and they're going to be the potential volunteer fireman is going to be able to figure out, well, why would I volunteer for this then? I could, just not have a job entirely. And, so you, at the beginning, when you first hire someone who's a fireman, let's say, all right, and they go out on several calls and you can discipline them, but never, fire them or never, actually end the contract, then you'll have learned a very valuable lesson. And you'll have learned it in the hard way. You'll have learned don't hire a fireman. And all the other businesses, so there's probably going to be a year or two right at the beginning if this passes as it is, where people are actually joining up to be volunteer firefighters, but then, people will figure out pretty quick that it doesn't actually work out. So if the goal is to increase the number of volunteer firemen, there seems to be a much broader variety of ways to do that don't have perverse incentives in there.
Valid point. Representative Wolf, you heard a lot of conversation. Feel free to step up to the microphone and tell us where we're right. Tell us where we're all wet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
this bill has certainly taken on a life much bigger than I thought it was when I proposed the original bill to OLS. I've had 2 firemen, volunteers, come to me and say, I'm being beaten on by my boss because I've had a couple of incidents. Not big, not many, but a couple of incidents where I was late. I responded to a call on the way to work. And they were reprimanded for showing up late. And they now are in a position where they have to make a decision. Do I continue on to work, or do I attend to that accident that I just drove by? I think what we were talking about here is, and I don't know very many firefighters that are going to try to make a mathematical decision as to whether I get more money as a firefighter or as a volunteer where I don't get any. You know, we have some call firefighters, et cetera. I would like, the intent of this bill was that if a firefighter is responding, is going to work, and ends up responding on the way to work, not leaving in the middle of the day or any of that sort of stuff, that they cannot be reprimanded or fired for performing their duties as they're on their way to work. That was all the intent of the bill was.
Okay.
And I'm happy to answer questions. I think it's just grown beyond that.
All right, Representative, just a second, guys. Section RSA 153A17, okay, is current law. If I can read 2 sentences for you, okay? No licensed emergency medical care provider who in good faith attempts to render emergency medical service authorized by this chapter at an emergency scene while en route to a place of employment shall receive any form of reprimand or penalty by an employer as a result of late arrival of the place of employment. That is current law when it comes to EMTs. I am 100% willing to give the same thing to firefighters if on their way to work they come across something and render service. If that's as simple as you want it to be. Any comments?
Does that
Representative
include
Leclerc?
getting a call on the way or just seeing something on the way?
I'll read it a bit. It's 153A17. This came to me because Representative Wolf said, well, the EMTs already have it. So I went to look at it. So I pulled this up, and it wasn't as it's really not so I was confused because the bill in hand in front of us isn't really consistent with this, but I was always okay with it. So let me read it one more time. No licensed emergency medical provider who is in good faith attempts to render emergency medical service authorized by this chapter at an emergency scene while en route to a place of employment shall receive any form of reprimand or penalty by an employer as a result of late arrival. So if they come across a fire, they come across a traffic accident, and you are a firefighter, an EMT, or you are driving to work and you see a house on fire, you go in, you grab people, you pull them out, you start putting the hose on and do whatever on the way to work. It doesn't say about, oh, I hear a call, the thing, I can go. If you want to extend this exact sentence to firefighters, Representative Cahill, you can either address me or Representative Wolf.
Mr. Chair, when you just read, you just said on the way to work for responding. Is that what I heard you say? Responding to a call?
While en route to a place of employment.
Responding.
An emergency medical provider who is in good faith attempts to render emergency medical service authorized by this chapter at an emergency scene while en route to a place of employment shall receive no discipline. So you could make it say any firefighter in good faith attempts to render firefighting services or medical services authorized by their whatever at an emergency scene while en route to the employment.
But it doesn't really say that, you know, if they get a call on their pager, it doesn't say that, but it doesn't say it's not either.
No, but I think correct. I mean, but it's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I like it.
It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was.
Yeah, I like it. But because it could be subject to interpretation, I think it would be,
Oh, you
but
can add, if you come across it, but you can't like deviate from your route to go to a call. I mean,
Well,
we can amend a sentence.
yeah.
Representative Wolf.
I think, as you and I have spoken, that takes care of 95% of the situation. You put the firefighters in with the EMS people, fine. The situation that you just mentioned, Representative, your pager goes off on your belt as you're going to as you're going to work. And the fire or the call is just on the next street over. And they should be able to go. So language in there, responding to on the way to work. And that's what I would make it, whether they come across it or they're getting a pager to go to it.
I may make it more narrow, but I think, I'm gonna, okay, I'm not gonna speak.
That's all we were looking for. So they can't be disciplined. They can't be discharged because they're going. And
So it's not
and it-
leaving from work, it's not leaving from work,
right.
okay, or anything like that. Representative Colcom, love either to me or the, representative.
Thank you. And I know I'm splitting hairs here and being very specific on this. But what about when they're returning to work from lunch, midday?
Nope,
No,
nope.
they've already signed in. I mean, we can sit here and go through all of the what ifs. But if you get that, it shows that the communities believe in their firefighters and want to have them and not be punished.
So, Representative Drago, so if the call goes off at 4 o'clock in the morning, okay, and they're gonna work at 6, well, they gotta be there at 6, okay? It's when they're en route from their residence to their job. Well, that's the way the current law is with emergency, that they come across it. Okay, now the question is, if it's in a pager that's next street over, maybe we have to add a sentence that said either yay or nay. Okay, but I think we're all going at least a little better. I have to pull them as I saw them. Representative Love, Brian 1 and Brian 2.
I think we're not addressing the Representative Drago's original thing, the financial burden here. The financial burden on the employer, okay, and the municipality kind of skating because they just have this, volunteer thing, and it's not as we heard $75,000 for a full-time firefighter. Could we amend it to say that that the city, town, municipality, whatever, can, because we can't shall anything, without funding it, can, negotiate a fair and decent, financial, help for the employer. If the employer can prove he lost, $500 or whatever that day,
I'm gonna.
it's.
I couldn't support that, Representative Love. I understand where you're coming from. If you guys have ever noticed anything on your homeowner's insurance policy, there's a little liability there.
Mhm.
So if you come into a car accident and a car accident happens and while you're trying to pull this person out of a burning car, which happened on 93 this week, you break their arm, or while you give CPR to them, you crack a couple ribs. There's a little thing in your liability in your insurance policy for giving medical aid. Okay, and just for those reasons, I still believe in this whole thing of helping my fellow man, and I would think someone would want to stop on the way if they see a house on fire or a car accident and give aid, and I'll forego the loss of the employer on that one, because I think I'm more in favor of letting people help their fellow man because it's the right thing to do. So, but I hear what you're saying.
Well, I was just saying, if Representative Drago has a dozen guys working for him, and if two of them, 2 or 3 times a month, are going to calls.
But
You know,
we're not
it's-
going to calls, Representative Love. This is on the way to work, coming across
Okay,
or
yeah.
seeing
Well,
something.
isn't
I'm
that what the
trying-
original bill was about?
No,
No?
no,
No?
it's, no. As Representative Wolf said, it kind of got blown up as to
Mhm.
leaving work,
Okay.
doing all these other things and so other. So, Representative Sullivan, damn it. Representative Seaworth and Sullivan.
Might help, might help. So I wanted to say I have to agree with Representative Colcom's interpretation of the existing law. When I see the phrase "while en route to a place of employment," I don't see anything about where you've started on that route, why or when. A couple of jobs ago, I routinely had to move between places of employment during the day. And I would think that if I were traveling an hour up north to get to my second place I needed to be that day, that I would be en route to that place of employment. And I'd kind of hope that if I saw somebody on the side of the road that needed emergency medical attention and I was an EMT, I could pull over and help them and be protected by this law. So I don't think, and this is not an argument against expanding this law. I think I actually like that idea. But I don't read this as being as narrow as it was suggested, that it's only before you've made it to your first time card punch of the day. To me, this could be any traveling between jobs for.
Well, I'm glad you and Representative Colcom brought that up. So with the power invested in me as chairman of this committee, I will have you and Representative Colcom come up with an amendment to 153A17, outlining that for firefighters and present it to the committee before our next meeting. Representative Sullivan.
I happen to believe as simple is good. I like the direction it's going. The one piece of confusion I've got is where it says under this chapter. And I'm concerned that firefighters might not fit under that chapter. I support the idea of doing an amendment. Check into that aspect of it. I'm not sure how you solve it. OLS can solve anything. So,
Just so you know what, very valid point, Representative Sullivan. 153A, Emergency Medical and Trauma Services, is the chapter under Public Safety and Welfare. So you are correct. We may very well be able to take 153A17 2 and place it an identical section, maybe under something, I don't know, is there a
place it where it
firefighter code?
belongs.
Is there RSA for,
Probably,
Gentlemen, you
it's
know
probably,
any?
it's probably this one.
it's not, because this is 275,
Oh, okay.
which is the work, which is
Right.
basically the labor law. So,
OLS may be able to find the right
a
spot.
little bit of a more meeting of the minds of what we want to do here with this. Representative Wolf, any last comment?
So I was
Representative
just going to
Susie?
say real quick, and maybe Mark can help me out on this, but I believe that people that are certified as a first responder, EMT, firefighter, because I'm pretty sure that this was drilled into me when I was in the fire service, that if you're coming across something, regardless of when it is, and I think people are covered under the Good Samaritan law that aren't, but I think you have an obligation to stop and assist if you come by an accident. I mean, if somebody saw my truck driving away with a Union sticker on the back, I'm sure people are not going to be happy if I just go, oh, I'm not stopping for this accident. And it happened to me one morning when I was actually going to work in Nashua, heading down the road to go to work, and all of a sudden I see smoke coming from a building. Stop my truck. Now it's 7:30. I have to respond to work at 8 o'clock. Now I'm the first one there before the fire trucks. Ran inside the building, got the people out of the building. Wasn't late for work, thankfully, but I think there is something, and maybe I'm mistaken, but if we could find that out, there may be an obligation for people to have to stop and render assistance.
This is the only thing that was brought to my attention. I guess I can have OLS do some research, or our research, to try to figure out if there is one similar. But your point being, let's say, you lived in Amherst and you're, or Brookline, and you're on the way to, you were living it. In this case, you were living in Nashua, you were going to your job in Nashua. Let's say you were crossing two towns and you stopped in an adjoining town where you didn't work. And then you got to work an hour late. I don't want you to be disciplined for not doing, for doing that. Obviously, when the other guys show up, you can then go on your way or whatever. That's much more consistent with this 153A17. Final hands, Representative Wolf. I guess,
Mr. Chairman,
sir.
I think if we can narrow it down to something simple like that, we don't have, to my knowledge, firemen that are out milking the system. The communities are not trying to save a few bucks by having volunteers do it versus full-time firemen. We're trying to improve the recruitment of these volunteers, and someday we'll all have full-time fire departments. But in the meantime, we need to get these people, we need to have them want to come to work and not be fearful of being reprimanded or losing their job. And I think your solution is.
I agree. My favorite uncle was a volunteer firefighter for 20-some years. He worked at Hamilton Standard by Bradley Airfield over in Hartford, and he responded to the tornado they had there and the fire in the hotel and all the other stuff. So I have an allegiance to my favorite uncle and his volunteer, and the stuff that he did over the years, I probably could never do. So I agree with you. Thank you, Representative Wolf. Representative Sullivan.
Just procedural, if there is an amendment that's put together, if it could be circulated before we have an executive session, that way if all of us nitpicky people find something that is a problem, we won't have to deal with it on the day of the executive session.
Very valid point. I will make sure that it's not even the day before or 2 days before, that everyone should have it for at least a week. So that's why Representative Colcom and Seaworth and I will make sure you get that to you soon enough.
If you indulge me a little lightheartedness, can I put in they cannot refuse to hire them in this amendment too?
No.
No. All right. Very well, folks. Go have lunch. 1 o'clock is OSHA. Any other comments? Anyone need anything? Thank you. Appreciate everyone's today.
in the calendar, which is sort of like if you see a better price than they charge you, you can get it at a lower price. It does say work session for the whole committee. So I understand this subcommittee is probably going to supersede that though.
Okay, if I'm not mistaken, I think the chairman asked me to lead this one up. Since he's not here, I'm going to do it anyways. I think this is going to be sort of an organizational meeting, and I think there's going to be several more coming come September. The speaker has yet again shut down the State House for the months of July and August. And this time I understand that this is not a committee that can meet during July and August. No, they actually don't want us here.
Oh, is that right?
So, where we start? The purpose for retaining, one of the reasons was just to let people who are interested in speaking up and getting their perspectives across, give them a chance. Because frankly, when we had the study committee, it started quite late. We ended up getting sidelined for 2 critical months of July and August. And we ended up having to conclude without hearing from the various groups that might be affected by this. Again, it's public sector OSHA. So essentially, it's going to take the OSHA safety standards, section 1910, and which applies to all private sector workers in the state, and apply it to the public sector workers. It does not invite OSHA into New Hampshire. It just invites their standards. So it will still be the Department of Labor that does the inspections, works with public sector employees the way they always have, and but they'll simply have a more up-to-date set of standards. I think in earlier conversations with the Deputy Commissioner, I think we've acknowledged that it's been over 10 years since the Department of Labor safety standards have been reviewed and upgraded. So it's clear that that's something that's not working right now. And rather than engage in an effort to upgrade all of those, we can simply take the private sector OSHA standards and apply them to the public sector. And when they get upgraded, the public sector standards for New Hampshire will automatically get upgraded. So the groups that I'm anticipating hearing from, I know Commissioner Arlinghouse is, I think, in finance, or he's, no, my fiscal committee. Yeah, that's right. That's a Friday thing. So he will try to drop in as he has a chance. But the Department of Administrative Services definitely has an interest. I know the county has expressed interest in this issue. I would anticipate that the Municipal Association would also be interested, as might the schools, the fire, and police. Are there other groups that I'm leaving out that we know of? And that's national. So I don't know if you gentlemen are here to provide input or just to listen, but if you're interested in input, and I'm not quite sure which organization you're here from.
I'm David Ross from Hillsborough County, representing the nursing homes for the county association. We would definitely like to be participative in this process. The incorporation of these standards into the healthcare sector will be meaningful and impactful for us. Some things that we really would want to consider is the opportunity for us to be able to articulate really what some of the specific impacts would be. We have to go through those a little bit more in detail to be able to give you that. I'm not prepared to give you that detail today. but also the timeline for implementation. In the bill as it was proposed, the implementation date was going to be 60 days from passage, and incorporating that timeline certainly wouldn't be feasible for us with any meaningful possibility. So we'd like to be engaged in this discussion if that's okay.
And I know that the effective date has been a subject of in-depth discussion, and I don't think 60 days was likely to be a part of that consideration. I think we were looking at a substantially later implementation date. And there's just some question as to, exactly what the best mark would be. So we welcome having you here. And have you received a copy of the file that the Department of Labor has put together with the side-by-side for 1910?
We do have that, yes. Yep. So we're currently going through that now to be able
Great.
to take a look at that and see if we can identify from a facilities perspective what those impacts would be and then what the cost implications may be as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have questions or comments for the counties?
Tell me what you're using now, because private nursing homes are under OSHA, and there's a separate standard, as I understand, for nursing homes. So tell me, what are you currently following? Are you following the stuff from Rudy and from the DOL, or are you accessing a national standard?
Yeah, so we follow a combination of standards. So we follow certainly the Department of Labor standards that are in existence, and also standards that are established by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. We have to follow CDC guidelines. They incorporate references to national standards as well. We have to follow emergency preparedness standards, which impact life safety, compliance with life safety codes. But the OSHA standards that are referenced here incorporate very specific and targeted changes that are not consistent with current policies and procedures within our facilities. The private sector, you're absolutely right, does something very different. So they've incorporated those from the get-go. So our organizations have really been established on a different foundation. So we have to really create a different structure to be able to ensure compliance.
Follow-up. So the standards that you referred to, do you have any sense that they're more specific to your industry? Do you have any sense of how when you put them side by side? I mean, should we carve out, for instance, or just reference, the standards you were referring to now? Does that cover the ground? Does it be more specific to your industry as opposed to something like this?
We would certainly appreciate that. I think that would certainly make it very specific and helpful for us because it wouldn't require substantial change for us. The OSHA standards reference very specific implementation standards and things that reference specifically targeted education that encumbers very specific topics, referencing specific signage within facilities, different policies and procedures that are not specifically referenced in our existing policies or in the life safety code. So we would have to go back and implement those things. Not that it's a bad thing. It's just going to be impactful for us.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Ross.
Thank you.
Rudy, are you available for a minute? Rudy and I have had a couple of conversations, one of which I thoroughly confused him. And I think earlier today, maybe I did away with confusion. I might go into this again when Commissioner Arlinghouse comes up, if he makes it. But I was talking with some weeks ago, Joyce Pittman, who is also with the Department of Administrative Services, approached me saying that they're responsible for all of the departments and agencies in the state. And she was concerned that they might need some help with figuring out exactly what they need to do to make adjustments. And we're looking for some consultant assistance. And when I was talking to Rudy, he thought I was referring to a consultancy program, which is part of the state plan, which we're not doing. So basically, what I am hoping, and I think Ms. Pippin is hoping, is that the department might be able to, if we get this passed, the department might be able to assist some of the public sector groups with some consultant assistance with making that transition. I don't know if you can speak to that, Rudy.
Thank you. So yeah, I was confused. No, it was my fault, not yours. We would have to just look in terms of the level of effort of that. So we would certainly always look to assist any employer if they're saying, hey, I have compliance questions. That's presently what we do on a one-off type of capacity, is like when we go in and perform an inspection, if they say, here are our issues, here are our concerns, we work with them now. If they're talking about a kind of a across the state type level of effort, it would take a long time to do all agencies. We could certainly handle, like an agency comes to us and says, here's our operation, here's what we're doing / not doing. So it's something to think about. I mean, I guess I would be interested in terms of when she's saying that, is what timeline is she thinking of? Is she thinking of, like, again, like a prospective look at the 60 some odd boards and agencies and say, are they good to go, not good to go? Or is she thinking like we stagger that out in terms of, go through them at some type of pace? But in a general sense, the consultancy or working with employers on coming into compliance is something we're comfortable with. Providing training is something we're comfortable with. I guess just in terms of what is the timeline or expectation. So that would be something we would want to look at and be sorted out.
Right, and that might also play into where we pick the implementation date. Where would the department be at with regard to, I mean, I've said over and over again that I've never considered our Department of Labor to be a punitive entity, a gotcha type of entity. So if some of the public employers were still learning and making transitions after the implementation date, how would the department deal with that?
Probably similar to how we deal with them now, which is, again, to be clear, we go in and deal with employers now who are not in compliance with existing standard. And the way that we deal with them is those violations are cited, that there's a period for remediation, and our civil penalties relative to safety are incredibly low. Usually we held the penalties, civil penalties for safety violations are held in abeyance, allowing the employer to go through a remediation process.
And I think some of the fear that we've experienced with the study committee and also the earlier subcommittee, I think is based on a fear that they're going to be facing OSHA penalties, which isn't true because it's Department of Labor that's going to be implementing this. And I think they're fearful that there's going to be some gotcha activity going on. I've never had that impression. Exactly what you said is what we've always believed is the case. So essentially a violation would be an opportunity to make an adjustment and learn.
Correct.
Yeah. Anyone else have questions along those lines?
Thank you, Commissioner. So what I'm trying to get my arms around is the scope of this, of this, trying to match these two kind of standards. So you have the current standard, which I would assume is a product of the DOL and the rules and regs and all of that's what's been developed over a period of time. And then we're hearing from others who are saying, well, it's such a big undertaking to comply with the OSHA standard. And at some point, we're gonna have to reconcile those things. There's gonna have to be, you know, some way of measuring, so where are you on the scale of things? So where is the, you know, this department of the state on in terms of scale? So to me, we don't know what the scope of it, so it's easy, and I was a lobbyist for a long time, it's easy to say it's gonna cost us all this money, but you gotta quantify that. And that's what I think is gonna be the challenge. And quite frankly, we know what the standard is, it's out there. And so if somebody comes into this committee, I hope that you can help them and others can help them begin the process of identifying. So where is the conflict? Where are the big areas that we are gonna be problematic as we move forward? And I don't know how big that is.
I think you have identified as this conversation has gone on, one thing that has continually come up is it is difficult to quantify and certainly qualify those costs. What I have tried to say consistently is that there are significant differences, and mainly it's the gentleman who spoke before me, I think spoke very well. It's really a lack of specificity. Our current standards are very non-specific. They are very general. Something I have said in the past is that does not mean that there are no standards. It just means that when we run across, we're typically working backwards. And what I mean by that is if we go into an employer after there has been a safety concern, we would look at it and say, okay, we don't have a specific standard on what occurred or what didn't occur, but we have a general duties clause. And then when we try and flesh out what the general duty of care would be for that employer, we might look to OSHA, we might look to CDC, we might look to all of these different things. And then that's where we come forth with a recommendation to that employer and say, hey, going forward, you had this event. Going forward, you should probably adhere to these types of standards under your general duty clause. You've identified a hazard. General duty would suggest you follow these established standards, but they're not set forth specific in New Hampshire state law. So again, I'm not just trying to ramble on and on. I think you're absolutely right that it is difficult to say this is going to cost X amount more. It's difficult to say that this is going to take this amount of time. But there is a gap. The gap is we are not very specific. Our standards, a lot of times we are referencing a general duty clause, and then the general duty clause, we look elsewhere. We look to OSHA, we look to CDC, we look to best industry practice, things of that nature.
So can I follow up with that? So that being the case, what I'm trying to get at is, do we have to, if there are standards that are currently out there that have been implemented, that provide a certain level of safety, that are industry standards, the prison being one of them, you know, the prisons have their own standards. In fact, I think they're exempt from OSHA, if I'm not mistaken. So can those be part of this, this scheme of developing this whole program of OSHA and protections for workers? So, or do we have to wipe the slate clean and then begin again in building all this?
Can I?
It's a very different approach.
And Mark, since you're new to Representative McKenzie, since you're new to this process, back when we had the study committee, the Department of Labor did a ton of work on doing a side-by-side comparison of the Department of Labor standards and the not only the 1910 but the other two sets of standards, and we concluded the 1910 would be the most applicable one to public sector in New Hampshire, and so that's there, and that should be actually maybe you could just send those out to all members of the Labor Committee.
Yeah, we'll send that out.
Yeah, and I'll warn you, it's a very large file, and when you initially open it, it opens up completely to, can't remember how many thousands of pages it is, but it's big. But once you save it to your hard drive and then reopen it from the hard drive, it opens up a table of contents with little bullets, and you can click on one at a time. You experienced this, didn't you? It freaks you out to begin with, but once you do the save and reopen, you get a very workable document that does a very nice job of comparing the the OSHA and the Department of Labor standards. So that was one of the big pieces of work that needed to be done. The deputy commissioner very legitimately said that he embraced the idea of doing it, but needed to be told he had to do it because it was a big job. And I'm witness to the fact that it was a very large job. Go ahead.
Without being dismissive of those efforts, the one thing I want to be clear on, and I do apologize, to the gentleman behind us, and I would acknowledge this when Ms. Pittman had brought it up as well. To be clear, it's not as in-depth or granular as some people would probably want. It is showing you OSHA has this section, we have nothing. OSHA has this section, this is what New Hampshire has. It does not qualify or say what the differences might mean in terms of operations or costs or anything like that. And I only point that out. I do think it's a useful document, and we did it, so I'm not trying to be dismissive of it. I just point out that, I think some folks want more, and I acknowledge that it's not like some consultancy it wasn't that it was put together and it answers all questions, if that makes sense.
But it does a very nice job of showing where we are in comparison. And sometimes it's just OSHA words it one way and Department of Labor words it a different way, and you got to sort of stare at it for a while, see if it's just equivalent or different. But it is a very helpful document and very useful. And well,
Mr. Chairman, question?
Yep.
Thank you. So with that, and I haven't seen it, do you at some point incorporate in that process those standards which are currently in place for various industries throughout the state, or the counties, whatever the case may be? So where there's the OSHA standards, there's the DOL stuff, but there are also standards that are currently, safety and health standards that are currently in place to a whole variety of public sector. The fire has it, prisons have it, nursing homes have it. So, so what I don't want, there is a gap, but I don't know how big that gap is. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be clear, this document does not pull in those other standards. This is literally just the 1910 to 1400 or 277. It does not reference other standards.
And I don't think we wanted to, because basically this bill adopts the 1910 OSHA standards, no others. I don't think we want to complicate it by bringing all sorts of other organizations and other standards in. The nursing homes may already be subject to other safety standards through other organizations that are watching them. But this bill is simply adopting the OSHA standards, no others. Anything else? I'm trying to think if there's anything else before you take off on us. I had hoped that we'd have more folks, showing interest today. It was in the calendar for 2 weeks, but haven't seen anything. Representative Schultz.
This question may, feel free to say or help me clarify if this is too broad of a question. I think it would be helpful to know, since there is already a process from your department to address those safety standards in all these other areas of the state, and to what degree, I guess it would be hard to know exactly all the specifics for the new application of that, but roughly say how many staff folks do you have working on these issues, and do you currently hire any contractors for trainings or investigations? Like, what sort of infrastructure do you have covering workplace safety for what our laws already cover. And if that's too broad, I'm open to the correct way to ask that.
No, I think I understand the question. So in terms of existing infrastructure, the department historically has had 3 to 3.5 folks covering safety. That's been made up of 2 inspectors, and administrative/clerical support staff, and then a portion of the director of inspections time. In the last either 18 months or 12 months, I guess I'd have to look back and see specifically hire dates. We've hired now another safety inspector. So where we had 2, we now have 3 full-time safety inspectors. We still have the support staff and a portion of the director of inspections time. I would point out that we're presently in the process, regardless of what happens with this prospective legislation. We are currently in the process of taking one of our positions and turning that into a safety manager. The safety manager position would manage directly the field inspectors and that administrative clerical support person, and they would then report to the director of inspection and then up through the commissioner. So in terms of just staffing, we're probably looking to we've added 1 full-time safety inspector, and we are looking to add 1 other position. And when I say add, specifically what we're doing is taking a current vacant position and repurposing it.
Okay, that's very helpful. Along those same lines, are there any entities, because I know for sure that the private sector hires consultants to help them, and there's a lovely place here in the north part of Concord that hosts groups on a number of levels about safety, and that is, I'm fairly certain, not a state. I think those are consultants that work on that with industries that need it. Do you hire consultants to help with any aspect of this, from PR, developing workplace safety flyers, like at any level? Do you have any consultants that assist with this sort of safety work for the existing programs?
No, we don't.
Anything else? Yep.
I mentioned, I talked to you real quick earlier, under the Workers' Comp Reform in 1993, there was created a section of the law that that created safety enhancement programs, and you mentioned that you use this, but it does seem to authorize the Commissioner of Labor to offer these programs, safety enhancement programs, and to hire consultants to do some of this work. It's specific to that, it looks like, and provide grants to as well. So that's been around for a long time, and you mentioned a little bit how you use that. So
Yeah, presently and thank you for showing that and speaking to me about it earlier. There is within the workers' comp section 281A a particular provision which speaks to the department's safety training. What that has been and utilized presently as is that our safety inspectors will, as part of our training programs and outreach that we do for employers, a certain portion of those trainings are dedicated to a safety inspector providing an overview of an employer's requirements under 281A64. Now, those are certainly more narrow than what we're talking about today. Under 281A64, we're talking about safety summary forms. That's the requirement that employers of 15 or more individuals in the state provide a safety summary form detailing, I have a program. This is what my program entails. Additionally, our safety inspectors at those seminars presently are speaking to joint loss management committees. Again, that's a requirement under 281A64 that employers of 15 or more have an operating joint loss management committee, which discusses safety issues and makes recommendations relative to safe operation of the employer in their utilization of employees. So again, Representative McKenzie, I understand your point is that perhaps that could be looked at with a broader view. Presently, what that's being utilized or looked at for is under 281A64, the safety summary form and joint loss management program, but it's something that we can look at.
It would be helpful if you could take a look and see if that statute does apply to what we may want to do here in transitioning from DOL standards to OSHA standards. If it doesn't apply, we might want to come up with some mirror language to attach to this bill so that we can have the directive to the Department of Labor and an appropriation if needed to make that happen for the various public sector employers.
And to be clear on that provision right now, there are no grants or no appropriations or anything like that. It literally is a training where our safety inspectors will provide that training. So there's presently no appropriation or grants offered or anything of that nature.
So probably we would need to create something similar, but applied specifically to the safety standards, correct?
Depending upon what you wanted to do with it.
Right. But that statute doesn't do it.
No.
Okay. Very good. Anything else for the Deputy Commissioner? Thank you. Commissioner Arlinghouse, do you have some thoughts you might want to share with the committee?
I don't really. I'm here and I think somebody probably told you that, Joyce Pittman would be here, but she had a long scheduled day off. And the last thing I do is ask valued employees to cancel vacations.
It is summertime.
Yes, exactly. No, I think you talked to Rudy and Rudy's the expert. And, our department is obviously able to, from a state perspective, help implement whatever policy decisions the committee makes and all of that.
And I think we recognize that Department of Administrative Services will have a lot of ground to cover with regard to all of the agencies and departments. So we want to make sure that we're setting you up for success.
I think to the extent to, depending a lot on what you end up deciding to do, we've talked in the past about there's a significant, there's a cost to it in doing the evaluation of, where the state is, what changes have to be made and all of that. So if you start looking at an appropriation, I would encourage you to take that into consideration. It's not, a significant transition, depending on what you're doing, is not something that couldn't be done with existing staff.
Right. Go ahead.
Hi, Commissioner.
Hi.
This may be relevant or it may not. My spouse worked at admin services before your tenure, so I know some from his point of view as it's been shared. I know that there are existing things that already address safety just because it's the smart thing to do, from ergonomic training. I don't know what department
Sure.
that comes out of. Maybe the HR, I forget what you call HR in your admin services, but two, of course, if there is a state-run facility that needs the safe serve training for food service workers, because you have some food service workers. So there must be already, just for basic common sense, like don't mix bleach with ammonia. Like there must be some sort of thing already happening to some degree. Because let's face it, not everybody does have common sense about these things. So I'm wondering, do you know either through consultants or employees that you or others may direct who implements those things now?
It's a good question. I think, did your spouse work in FDM? Do I remember that? Yes. Okay. I try to lodge a piece of information in my brain every now and again. So we obviously occupational safety is a concern of ours every day, right? And it takes different forms in different places. Obviously, computer workers have different things they look at. A lot of it involves we do regular chair inspections, for example, and things like that. Whereas on our plant and property section, where we have hundreds of employees who are doing more traditional physical labor. We have we do trainings and things like that all the time. In the budget, we transformed a position into into a health and safety officer. So things like that do happen, and frankly, in every department, if you think about it. And I'm sure transportation, for example, probably has a fairly robust program. So a lot of those things are happening. They tend to be geared along the lines of what do you do every day, and how do we make sure you don't get back injuries, for example. We have workers' comp consultants who work with, from our insurance carrier, who work periodically with agencies on, things as simple as the proper way to lift a box to not get back injuries. They tend to work less with me because I lift fewer boxes than average, or at least not heavy ones. So a lot of that is going on. I don't know that for the most part those things would be repurposed, because none of what any of those people are doing would we stop doing, right? I mean, we're still going to be doing all of that kind of stuff, but no, there's a lot that does go on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Seeing how we have no one else who wants to speak to the committee, my thinking is that Rep. Colcom and I guess Avellini and Infantine will have to do some scheduling, and I hate to do scheduling with two important people not in the room. But after next week, we're pretty much shut down for July and August. I would anticipate getting back to this in September and scheduling a series of meetings and inviting some of these interest groups in, not only the employers, but the employee representatives that match up with them, so that we can get a clear picture of what they feel they need in order to make this program work for them. Can I get a feel from Reps. McKenzie, Susie, and Colcom as to what kind of schedule you would want to set for the fall?
Mackenzie just
Oh,
stepped out.
I didn't see that.
He's talking to Arlinghouse.
Oh, great. I'm thinking in terms of weekly, bi-weekly. Do you want to hit it aggressively and get it over with, or do you want to spread it out over September and October? Weekly meetings?
Are you allowed to have those over Zoom?
No.
I am out of town until September 7th. After that, I can be flexible with my
Okay.
schedule.
We'll,
Mondays will be hard, but other
okay,
days.
we can certainly avoid Mondays then. What I will plan to do is touch base with Representatives Avellini and Infantine next week. We're obviously all in on Thursday, and find out what'll work best, and start getting some emails to you folks to let you know what the schedule is, and then getting some invites out to these various interest groups who may want to come in and get the information. And Deputy Commissioner, perhaps I can get a list together of people that you can send the 1910 comparison file to, so that when people arrive, they're not, I mean, if we tell them about it when they get here, they haven't had a chance to do much of anything with it. And I think Mr. Ross has experienced that it's a bit of an undertaking. So it's something they'd want to have well in advance. I was frankly quite surprised when I first opened it, and somewhat baffled, because we had 3 files, and 2 of them were very similar, and it's just but boiling it down to just 1910, I think will help. And I think some of these groups will be able to look at it and say, this doesn't apply to me, I'm not even going to open it. So I think a lot of the groups can simply pick and choose those areas that are relevant to their area of work. If you're in a nursing home, you don't have to do the heavy equipment section. Well, maybe you do a little bit. What do I know? So anyways, unless there's something else that we need to discuss, we good? Mackenzie's gone. Okay, well, we will bring this to a close then. Thank you.